The Victorian asylum rose from the valley like a silent sentinel, its red brick walls soaked in mist and shadow. From the outside it appeared almost ordinary, sturdy, orderly, and even comforting to some. The iron gates creaked softly with the breeze, and the stone statues in the garden seemed frozen in eternal watchfulness. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the place as if it were just another institution, a necessary part of the town's structure where the troubles were kept away and the lost could be found again. But beneath that calm facade, behind rows of shuttered windows and locked doors, a different truth writhed quietly in darkness. Whispers began to spread, first barely audible rumors carried by frightened servants or furtive visitors. Patients who had entered the asylum never seemed to leave. Officially, they were transferred, discharged, or moved to other wards, but no one ever saw them again. The silence surrounding these disappearances was heavier than the valley fog that settled each evening. The staff moved with practiced precision, their faces masks of professionalism, hiding eyes that avoided questions and conversations that stalled abruptly. To an outsider, everything was orderly and routine, but the few who dared to peek beyond the surface sensed something methodical and cruel beneath the polished exterior. The air inside was thick with an unspoken fear, as if the walls themselves listened and breathed with secrets too terrible to name. In the daytime, the asylum hummed with muted activity. Footsteps echoed down long hallways, the scratch of pens on paper, and the soft murmur of voices through closed doors. But at night, a different rhythm pulsed in the shadows. Some spoke of a strange sound, a slow, uneven breathing that seemed to come from the very structure, a living presence that watched without eyes. Patients vanished, screams were stifled before they could be heard, and yet no alarm was ever raised. The careful silence was part of the design, a ritual in itself. It was as if the asylum fed on these disappearances, growing stronger and colder, hiding its true purpose behind the veneer of care and normalcy. In this place, evil did not announce itself with shouts or visible cruelty. Instead, it seeped in slow, deliberate increments, disguised as treatment, discipline, or even kindness. The doctor's smile was warm. The nurse's touch was gentle. But beneath their hands lay an unyielding grip of control, a desire to break bodies and minds with precision so clinical it was almost art. This was no madman's frenzy. This was a calculated, ritualistic unraveling of human will, a dark dance between order and chaos hidden behind the asylum's quiet facade. And as the fog thickened outside, swallowing the valley whole, the shadows within grew longer, waiting for the next to enter and disappear into the breathing walls that never stopped. Dr. Elias Harrow arrived at the asylum with the kind of quiet confidence that made people lower their guards without even realizing it. His smile was practiced, his eyes calm and calculating, as if every movement and word were part of a carefully rehearsed performance designed to soothe unease and inspire trust. To most, he was a man of science and compassion, a healer dedicated to easing the suffering of the mind. But beneath that polished surface lurked a mind consumed by obsession, an obsession with control, with the fragile boundaries of sanity, and with the ways those boundaries could be shattered piece by piece. His methods were unlike anything the world had seen before. He did not merely treat madness, he dissected it, not with scalpels but with ritual and precision. Patients were subjected to procedures that seemed at first clinical and reasonable, but as time passed, a pattern emerged. Each treatment was a carefully constructed experiment in breaking wills and bending realities. He devised rooms where the very air seemed to twist perception, where silence was not peaceful but suffocating, engineered to strip away the layers of a person's identity. His fascination was not just with the body but with the soul, with the intangible threads that hold a person's mind together. He would observe with cold detachment the slow unraveling of his subjects as they slipped into terror, confusion, and despair. In his office, the walls were lined with journals filled with cryptic notes and strange diagrams. Maps of the human mind crossed with occult symbols as if science and superstition were two halves of the same obsession. His handwriting was precise, but the content was disturbing. Formulas for pain that lingered long after flesh healed. Rituals that blurred the lines between healing and harming. And a secret code that hinted at something beyond mere medicine. The staff whispered about his late-night experiments, about the strange chants he would mutter while alone, and about the objects he collected. Bones carved with intricate patterns, jars of murky liquids, and artifacts that seemed out of place in a place of healing. His charm masked a brutal need to dominate, to impose order on chaos through any means necessary. Every patient was a puzzle, a project to be dismantled and remade in his image of control. And when one broke completely, when the last thread of resistance snapped, he was there, not with compassion, but with cold satisfaction, as if each collapse was proof of his mastery. His presence was a paradox. To the outside world, a respectable doctor, a pillar of the community. Within the asylum walls, a master puppeteer pulling strings of fear and silence. The darkness he wielded was methodical, ritualistic, a slow-burning fire that consumed without flames. This was not madness meeting cruelty. It was a calculated evil that hid behind a mask of normalcy, feeding on trust and bending it into something unrecognizable. And as the patients disappeared into the labyrinth of his design, one could not help but wonder, how far could a mind travel down the path of obsession before it becomes indistinguishable from the monsters it seeks to understand? The question lingered in the silent halls as the footsteps of Dr. Harrow faded into the shadows, always watching, always waiting for the next mind to unravel. Deep beneath the asylum's stone foundations, hidden from the eyes of the outside world, there existed a place known only to a select few, a chamber whispered about in terrified murmurs and shadowed confessions. The breathing wall. This was no ordinary structure. It was an entity in itself, crafted with twisted intent and an understanding of fear that bordered on the supernatural. The wall was not cold or lifeless like the others that enclosed the asylum's halls. Instead, it seemed to pulse, to breathe slowly and deliberately as if it were alive, watching, waiting. Constructed from ancient timber and cold iron bands, it flexed with a sinister rhythm, expanding and contracting like a giant lung designed to squeeze out every last ounce of resistance from those trapped against it. Patients taken to the breathing wall entered a nightmare far beyond physical pain. The wall did not merely imprison bodies, it suffocated souls, wrapping its grasp around their very essence. Inside its hollow, patients were forced to press against it, their limbs pinned in impossible angles as the wall's movements constricted tighter and tighter. compressing not just flesh but hope itself. It was a slow, methodical crushing, a torment that stripped away humanity layer by layer. Unlike any known torture, this was a dance of breath and silence, the wall inhaling deeply as if tasting terror, exhaling dread into the confined space. Some who entered spoke later, if only in broken whispers of hearing the wall's voice. A low, guttural sound that seemed to speak in the language of nightmares, calling to the darkest fears buried within. The air inside was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of iron and decay, mingled with a faint metallic whisper that some claimed was the wailing of lost souls trapped within its timber ribs. It was a place where time warped, seconds stretching into hours, and sanity slipped away like smoke through clenched fists. Escape was impossible. The wall closed around victims with a patience born of ritual, its slow rhythm mimicking the heartbeat of some monstrous being feeding on pain. The deaths inside the breathing wall were unlike any others. There was no blood spilled in haste, no violent struggle ending abruptly. Instead, there was a slow fading, a dissolution into nothingness as the victim's body was crushed, suffocated, and finally absorbed into the very walls that held them. The disappearance was total, leaving no trace but an empty space, a hollow spot in the masonry that seemed to breathe quietly, waiting for the next to vanish. Those who dared to investigate found strange markings carved deep into the wood, runes or sigils that suggested this was more than mere construction, but a dark ritual woven into the fabric of the building itself. Some believed the wall was a living prison, a supernatural sentinel bound by ancient rites, while others whispered that it was the physical manifestation of Dr. Harrow's obsession, a cruel mechanism designed to control and destroy not only the body but the very will to live. The breathing wall was a secret kept carefully, a terror behind the asylum's calm facade, a reminder that evil could take many forms. It was a beast without eyes or voice, yet it hunted relentlessly, claiming victims one by one in silence. As the fog settled outside, swallowing the valley in its cold embrace, the wall continued its slow, methodical breathing, ready to trap and consume the next soul foolish enough to step too close. The whispering cells lay deep within the asylum's bowels, a forgotten corridor carved from stone and shadow, where silence was not just a rule but a weapon. These rooms were stripped of every comfort, every sound, and every flicker of light that could tether a person to reality. They were designed to erase presence, to reduce the soul to a fragile thread barely clinging to existence. Once inside, prisoners were plunged into a darkness so absolute it gnawed at the edges of their minds, twisting perceptions until truth and nightmare were indistinguishable. The cells were lined with thick, soundproof walls, but it was not only the absence of noise that tormented them. Hidden devices created a subtle but relentless assault on the senses. A low-frequency hum, inaudible to most, vibrated through the bones, planting seeds of unease that blossomed into madness. The air itself seemed charged with a pressure that crushed the spirit. Victims reported hearing whispers, voices that echoed just beyond comprehension, filling their heads with fragments of forgotten memories, fears, and voices that were not their own. These whispers were not random but carefully crafted illusions, a cruel symphony orchestrated by a mind fascinated with control through the unseen. The patient's sanity began to crack under the weight of isolation and sensory manipulation. Time lost all meaning. Moments stretched endlessly and memories warped into grotesque shapes. Eyes darted at shadows that were not there. Hands trembled at invisible threats, and the line between the self and the voices in the dark blurred into chaos. The psychological torture was merciless, slowly dissolving the prisoner's grip on reality until they became nothing more than hollow shells, drifting in a silent abyss. Death in the whispering cells was not marked by violence or blood, but by the slow erosion of the self until only silence remained. No screams echoed in these chambers, only the quiet collapse of minds shattered beyond repair. It was a death so complete that the world forgot those who had entered, leaving behind empty cells that seemed to absorb sorrow and echo it faintly for eternity. The design of these cells revealed the mind behind them, one that saw human suffering not as chaos to be controlled, but as a canvas to be shaped. The purpose was not punishment in the ordinary sense, but a ritualistic unraveling of identity, a test of how far the human psyche could be stretched before it tore itself apart. The evil here was methodical, a slow burning fire that consumed hope and replaced it with despair so deep it felt like drowning without water. This was not mere madness. It was a calculated erasure of existence, a horror so profound it defied words and yet left marks that haunted those who dared remember. In the dim corridors beyond the whispering cells, life carried on as usual, the outside world blind to the slow creeping deaths within. The asylum's heartbeat pulsed steadily, a dark rhythm beneath the calm surface, as the silence inside those cells swallowed souls one by one, leaving behind only whispers that no one was brave enough to hear. Mary moved quietly through the asylum's halls, her figure slight and easily overlooked, a ghost among the living. To most she appeared fragile, soft-spoken and gentle, a caretaker who offered comfort with a weary smile. But beneath that gentle exterior was a mind sharpened by the horrors she saw daily, a silent witness trapped within a machine built for cruelty. She had entered the asylum with hope, believing in healing and compassion. Yet the reality she encountered was a labyrinth of shadows and whispered terrors. Each day Mary watched patients vanish into locked rooms, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wide with unspeakable knowledge. She observed the small moments others missed, the furtive glances exchanged between staff, the sudden hush that fell when Dr. Harrow entered, and the strange rituals performed behind closed doors. Her heart ached with the knowledge that these were no mere treatments, but calculated acts of destruction disguised as care. Fear was a constant companion, not just for the patients, but for those who served the asylum. Mary knew that speaking out meant risking everything, dismissal, disgrace, or worse. The walls themselves seemed to listen, and the eyes of those who enforced silence were everywhere. So she endured, hiding her terror beneath a mask of obedience, all while recording in secret the slow, ritualistic deaths unfolding before her. She kept a hidden journal, scribbling notes about the breathing wall's victims, the whispers from the isolated cells, and the patterns she saw in Dr. Harrow's work. These notes became her act of rebellion, a fragile thread of truth woven through a tapestry of lies. Yet the weight of complicity pressed heavily on her conscience. Mary wrestled with guilt, haunted by the question of whether she was a silent accomplice or a prisoner herself, bound by fear and circumstance. She knew the mind behind the asylum's horrors was methodical, not mad but mercilessly calculating. This mind thrived on control and secrecy, turning suffering into ritual, breaking bodies and spirits with surgical precision. Mary's silent witness was both a curse and a burden, a slow descent into despair as she realized that the system was designed to swallow not only the patients, but also those who cared for them. Her days blurred into nights, each filled with shadows and unspoken screams until the line between hope and helplessness became indistinguishable. Yet even in the darkest moments, Mary clung to the fragile hope that one day the truth might emerge from the silence, that the world would finally see the evil hidden beneath the asylum's quiet facade. And so she waited, watching, recording, her presence a faint but vital pulse in the heart of a place where innocence had long since been consumed by darkness. In the cold depths of night, when the asylum's restless murmurs faded into an eerie silence, a hidden chamber came alive with a dark purpose. This was the place where Dr. Elias Harrow performed what he called the ceremony of bones, a grotesque ritual that blended his obsession with control, science, and a twisted form of cleansing. The ceremony was not public knowledge. It was whispered about only in fragments by those few who had glimpsed its shadowed horrors, yet it formed the sinister heart of the doctor's method. Within a stone-walled room lit by flickering candles that cast long, trembling shadows, the doctor arranged the bones of his vanished victims with meticulous care, assembling them into macabre altars that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Each bone was chosen for its symbolic weight, skulls representing broken minds, femurs for shattered strength, ribs for fractured souls, laid out in patterns that resembled arcane symbols drawn from a dark well of superstition mingled with medical theory. The doctor believed this ritual purified not only the patients but the asylum itself, a twisted sacrament meant to exorcise the chaos of broken minds through calculated sacrifice. As he moved through the ceremony, his actions were precise and deliberate. A surgeon's hand performing rites steeped in ancient meaning but driven by a scientific coldness that refused to acknowledge mercy. The bones were anointed with strange tinctures, oils infused with bitter herbs and substances meant to bind the spirits and contain their torment within the stone walls. The air grew thick with a scent both medicinal and rotting, a reminder of death's proximity and the ritual's power. To Dr. Harrow, this ceremony was a necessary cleansing, a way to impose order on suffering, to create meaning from madness. But to those who understood the horror beneath, it was an unholy act of domination, a symbolic murder that extended beyond flesh and blood into the realm of the soul. The psychological torment embedded in this ritual was profound. It was not enough to break a patient's body or mind. Each sacrifice was meant to sever their connection to hope, to sever the threads of humanity until only the cold geometry of bones remained. The ceremony was a dark mirror of the asylum's daily horrors, a ritual that gave shape to suffering and sanctified the doctor's role as both creator and destroyer. It revealed the depths of his macabre obsession, where science was twisted into superstition and ritual became a weapon of control. In this chamber of shadows, the boundary between life and death blurred, and the doctor's mind danced on the edge of madness and methodical cruelty. The ceremony of bones was not a moment of chaos, but a slow-burning nightmare etched into the asylum's very foundation. a silent vow that the evil within would never be undone but only be reborn with each new sacrifice. As the candles flickered low and the chamber sank back into darkness, the bones lay arranged like a morbid altar, a testament to the doctor's unyielding grip on suffering and the ritualistic evil that breathed beneath the asylum's quiet facade. Samuel arrived at the asylum under a veil of gray clouds, his demeanor sharp and skeptical, a man trained to seek facts and expose truths beneath layers of polite deception. From the moment he stepped through the heavy iron gates, he felt an unnatural chill settle over him. Not the cold of the valley's fog, but something colder. A silence so deep it pressed against his skin like a physical weight. The asylum was a fortress of shadows and whispered secrets, its quiet halls echoing with the absence of life rather than its presence. Samuel's role was clear: to audit the institution, to sift through records and routines, and to confirm that order and care were maintained within these walls. But as he moved deeper, poring over reports and inspecting rooms, the veneer of professionalism began to crack. The silence around him was not peace, but a void, thick with unseen menace, and the coldness was more than temperature. It was a presence that seeped into his bones and mind. Slowly he noticed the inconsistencies, missing patient files, erased names, and whispered rumors that staff dared not voice openly. More troubling was the slow erosion of his own certainty, as the asylum's oppressive atmosphere began to gnaw at his clarity. The rooms seemed to close in, shadows lengthening and flickering where no light should reach. Strange sounds echoed just beyond hearing, a soft breath, a faint shuffle that made his heart quicken despite his resolve. His nights were restless, plagued by dreams where walls pulsed like lungs, and voices whispered secrets too terrible to understand. The psychological decay that the asylum inflicted was subtle but relentless, like a slow poison coursing through his thoughts. He questioned his own senses, doubted memories, and found himself hesitating in corridors that moments before felt familiar. Samuel realized the institution was not merely a place of confinement, but a living organism, feeding on fear, twisting reality, and reshaping minds one fragile piece at a time. His investigation revealed that the evil here was not chaos or madness, but a cold, calculated method. A slow unraveling designed to break wills without a sound. The doctor's unseen hand moved through every corner, a puppeteer cloaked in normalcy, turning care into control and science into ritual. Samuel's skepticism faltered beneath the weight of this revelation, his mind slipping into the same shadows that claimed so many before him. As the cold whisper of the asylum grew louder in his thoughts, he faced a terrible question. Could he expose this darkness, or would he too become another silent victim swallowed by the breathing walls and endless quiet? In the dim, sterile rooms hidden deep within the asylum's forgotten wings, Dr. Elias Harrow pursued a darkness few could comprehend. A surgical masquerade where science and sadism fused into a grotesque art form. Here, under cold gaslights that flickered with an unnatural rhythm, victims were subjected to a procedure so horrifying it blurred the line between life and death, agony, and eternity. The doctor's method was precise, a cruel choreography of flesh and resin. Patients, often chosen for their perceived breakage, were restrained and immersed in a viscous, amber-colored organic resin. an experimental compound derived from rare botanical extracts and chemical concoctions designed to harden slowly, like ancient amber trapping prehistoric life. As the resin encased them inch by inch, the patients remained alive, their senses drowning in a rising panic as their bodies grew immobile, their skin sealed beneath a glossy prison. Their screams, unable to break free through the thickening shell, were fossilized in silence, a haunting monument to suffering captured forever in suspended terror. Dr. Harrow observed these living statues with a cold, detached fascination, cataloging each frozen expression of pain and despair with clinical precision. For him, this was more than torture. It was a perverse experiment in immortalizing the human soul's collapse, a physical embodiment of his obsession with control and permanence. The resin, mingled with pigments that stained the victim's skin in ghostly patterns, turned their agony into grotesque sculptures, art pieces of horror that lined the secret chambers like a macabre gallery. Each figure told a story not only of pain but also of the slow erosion of identity and the cruel ritual of turning living flesh into silent relics. This surgical masquerade was both scientific and ritualistic, a dark synthesis where ancient fears of entrapment met the cold logic of experimental medicine. The doctor's mind worked like a clockwork mechanism, every step calculated to push boundaries of anatomy, psychology, and morality. He was fascinated by the threshold between consciousness and oblivion, by how long a mind could endure imprisonment in its own failing body before surrendering to madness or death. The victims' faces, forever frozen in silent screams or wide-eyed terror, became grim testaments to this obsession. They haunted the asylum's hidden corridors, reminders that beneath the calm exterior lay horrors no one dared to name aloud. The surgical masquerade was a slow, cruel symphony played out in resin and flesh, a chilling monument to a mind that wielded evil not with brute force but with cold artistry. It was a final, unyielding act of domination, transforming pain into permanence, suffering into sculpture, and silence into an eternal scream etched forever in amber. As the resin hardened and the doctor's work was done, the living statues joined the asylum's shadows, whispering of a cruelty that was methodical, ritualistic, and terrifyingly human. The disappeared were ghosts before they were gone, names whispered in desperation by families who never saw their loved ones again, faces fading from memory as the asylum swallowed them whole without trace. Official records held gaps where patients once were, blank spaces marked by silence and denial, as if the institution itself sought to erase their existence from history. Behind the stone walls, these vanished souls were not just lost but deliberately erased, swept into the shadows by a system that thrived on secrecy and fear. Families waited in anguish, their pleas met with cold reassurances or evasive explanations, a bureaucratic shield that protected the asylum's dark heart. The pain of those left behind was a slow, gnawing torment, grief tangled with suspicion, hope twisted by silence. Mothers mourned children who never returned. Husbands searched for wives swallowed by the institution's unyielding grip. And entire communities felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down like the valley's ever-present fog. The disappearance was not accidental, but the result of a chilling, calculated design. Patients were broken down until they ceased to exist in any form. No body, no evidence, only a void where their lives once were. This systemic denial was a cruel extension of the asylum's methodical evil, a web of lies and silence spun to protect those who wielded power behind the masks of care. The emotional toll rippled outward, infecting the town with fear and mistrust, corroding the bonds of community as suspicion turned neighbor against neighbor. Rumors flourished, each more dreadful than the last, and yet no one dared confront the truth openly. Beneath the quiet streets and familiar faces, an undercurrent of dread flowed, an acknowledgement that the asylum's horrors reached beyond its walls and into the very fabric of daily life. The disappeared became symbols not only of loss, but of a deeper evil that thrived in silence and complicity. Their absence spoke louder than any scream, a haunting reminder of how easily humanity could be erased when cruelty wore the mask of normalcy. As the years passed, the memories of those lost blurred, but the wounds they left behind festered a dark legacy that the asylum's calm facade could never fully hide. The vanished were more than victims. They were a warning, echoes of a methodical horror that fed on denial and the quiet acceptance of evil hidden in plain sight. Mary's quiet endurance shattered under the weight of too many vanished lives and too much silent suffering. The walls she once moved behind with gentle footsteps now felt like iron bars closing in, pressing down on her chest with a crushing inevitability. Each day brought new horrors witnessed, new secrets uncovered, and the unbearable knowledge that her silence was a thread in the asylum's dark tapestry. In the depths of a sleepless night, despair transformed into resolve. Mary could no longer be a passive observer to this slow, ritualistic murder. Her act was not born of heroism but desperation, a trembling defiance against the cold machinery of cruelty that consumed so many. She chose a small but vital target, a vital system that controlled the air and light to the whispering cells, where so many minds had frayed and broken. With trembling hands and a heart pounding with fear and determination, she sabotaged the controls, cutting off the device that fed the sensory torment, hoping to offer some fragile relief to the prisoners trapped in their private hells. But the asylum was a place where even small acts of rebellion were met with swift and brutal reprisal. The consequences fell like a guillotine. Mary's sabotage was discovered, her fate sealed not by law or justice, but by the merciless will of those who ruled the asylum's hidden realms. She was stripped of her role, cast into isolation, and forced to watch as the machine of suffering ground on, her small act of resistance swallowed by the unyielding darkness. In her confinement, Mary wrestled with a brutal moral reckoning. Was she a victim, crushed beneath the weight of a monstrous system? An accomplice, her silence and fear complicit in the horrors unfolding? Or a reluctant hero, whose faint rebellion was a flicker of humanity in a place designed to extinguish it? The lines blurred, each possibility staining her with doubt and sorrow. Her mind became a battlefield of guilt and hope, a reflection of the asylum's own cruel paradox. A place where innocence was corrupted and evil wore the face of normalcy. Mary's reckoning was not a clear path to redemption, but a slow, painful unraveling, a haunting reminder that in the depths of darkness, even the smallest light can be swallowed whole. As the asylum's walls closed tighter around her, the echo of her desperate act lingered, a faint pulse of defiance in a place where silence and control were the deadliest weapons of all. After weeks submerged in shadow and silence, Samuel's investigation reached its inevitable grim crescendo. His notes, once orderly and clinical, now bore the stains of sleepless nights and shattered certainty. He had peeled back the asylum's thin veneer of care to reveal something far darker. An institution where cruelty was woven into the very mortar and stone, where evil hid behind normalcy like a poison in the bloodstream. The breathing wall stood at the heart of this darkness, an unnatural beast carved into the asylum's depths, breathing slowly and patiently as it crushed body and soul. Samuel's discovery was more than a damning truth. It was a confrontation with a methodical evil that defied understanding, a horror ritualized in silence and flesh. Armed with evidence painstakingly gathered from whispered testimonies, forgotten records, and hidden chambers, he confronted the powers that sought to bury the asylum's secrets forever. The wall that had swallowed so many victims was torn down piece by piece, not with the clamor of justice, but with a heavy, reluctant solemnity that echoed the slow dismantling of hope within those stone walls. As the massive timbers groaned and fell, the asylum seemed to exhale, releasing the trapped terror that had festered for years. Yet beneath the rubble lay a chilling revelation. Dismantling the wall was only a surface wound. The roots of evil had burrowed too deep, infiltrating minds, twisting systems, and corrupting hearts. The asylum's halls, once thought to be places of healing, were revealed as chambers of calculated suffering where ritual and cruelty masqueraded as treatment. Samuel saw how the rot had spread, not just in physical structures, but in the silence that protected abusers, in the complacency that allowed horrors to persist, and in the fragile psyches broken by slow, unrelenting torment. The fall of the breathing wall was both a victory and a warning. It exposed a truth too often ignored. Evil does not always wear a mask of rage or chaos. Sometimes it hides in quiet, measured cruelty, cloaked in authority and respectability, thriving in the spaces where no one dares to look too closely. The aftermath was marked by fractured lives and broken faith, a community grappling with the enormity of betrayal. Memorials would be built, laws rewritten, but the scars left by the asylum's darkness ran deeper than any stone could hold. Samuel's work illuminated the shadows, yet it also raised a haunting question that lingered long after the dust settled. How many other walls, unseen and silent, still breathe beneath the surface of places meant to heal? The answer remained uncertain, a chilling echo in the mind. Evil endures not in loud defiance, but in the quiet spaces between, waiting to be uncovered, remembered, and confronted. Years after the asylum's cold stone walls fell silent, a trove of hidden diaries and confessions came to light, peeling back the final veils of secrecy that had long cloaked its horrors. These pages, inked in trembling hands and whispered guilt, laid bare a world that society had refused to see. A labyrinth of calculated cruelty meticulously documented by those trapped within its orbit. The diaries spoke not only of physical torment, but also of the slow, grinding psychological decay inflicted with surgical precision by a mind obsessed with control and ritual. They revealed how the asylum was less a place of healing, and more a chamber where innocence was dissected, broken and discarded beneath a mask of normalcy. Confessions from former staff and patients alike told stories of fear silenced by complicity, of pain erased by denial, and of horrors so methodical that they blurred the lines between science and dark superstition. As the nation grappled with these revelations, shock gave way to a grim reckoning. The asylum was not an anomaly, but a symptom of a deeper societal failure, a reflection of how easily cruelty could embed itself within institutions meant to protect and nurture. The silence that had allowed this evil to flourish was not born from ignorance alone, but from willful blindness, a collective turning away from uncomfortable truths. For decades, the stories of those lost and silenced had been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and polite denial, their voices muffled by the weight of authority and fear. The public confronted a painful truth. Evil often hides not in monstrous figures, but in the quiet acceptance of ordinary faces, in the slow erosion of empathy when society looks away. The unsealed secrets forced a cultural confrontation with the dark underside of human nature and institutional power. A haunting reminder that vigilance is the price of justice. Memorials were erected, apologies issued, but the true legacy was a cautionary tale etched deep into the national consciousness. It was a call to remember those who suffered in silence and a warning that such darkness can return if society again chooses to close its eyes. The diaries and confessions were more than documents. They were echoes of pain and resilience, urging a new generation to recognize the subtle, methodical faces of evil and to challenge them wherever they hide. Evil rarely announces itself with thunder or flame. More often, it slips quietly beneath the surface, cloaked in routine and hidden behind the masks of everyday life. The legacy of the asylum's horrors is a stark testament to this truth, a reminder that the most devastating cruelty often wears the face of normalcy, whispered through the corridors of power and masked by the very institutions meant to protect. Dr. Elias Harrow's methodical evil was not born from madness alone, but from a chilling clarity of purpose, a cold devotion to control and ritual that allowed suffering to become systematic, unseen by those who looked only for chaos. This kind of darkness is slow, patient, and insidious. It infects systems, corrodes trust, and twists care into torment without a sound. The asylum's shadow stretched far beyond its crumbling walls, a silent wound etched into the fabric of society where fear, denial, and complacency conspired to bury truth beneath layers of silence. In the aftermath, laws were rewritten. To protect the vulnerable, memorials were raised to honor the lost, and warnings were etched into the public conscience. Yet these measures, though necessary, serve as fragile shields against a threat that never fully dies. The true challenge lies not only in rebuilding what was broken, but in recognizing that evil thrives best where vigilance fades, where silence is accepted, and where the ordinary is never questioned. This story is not merely a chapter in history, but a mirror reflecting the potential darkness in any place that hides behind civility and order. It asks a profound question. How often do we ignore the subtle signs of cruelty because they discomfort us, or because we believe evil must look monstrous to be real? The answer is found in the slow unraveling of the asylum's victims and the quiet mind that orchestrated their suffering with surgical precision. Evil's legacy is a call to awareness, a demand that we see beyond surface calm to the undercurrents of harm beneath. It reminds us that moral courage requires more than outrage. It requires steady, persistent vigilance and the willingness to confront darkness even when it wears a familiar face. As this story closes, it leaves behind a weighty question for all who listen. Could such evil rise again, hidden in the quiet corners of our own time? The answer rests in our eyes, our voices, and our refusal to look away. What do you think? Could this happen again?